History did not remember Rosalie Duthé for her ideas. It did not preserve her letters, her arguments, or the private sentences that might have revealed who she truly was. No diary survives, no memoir explains her inner life. Instead, history remembered her for something far thinner and far more dangerous. A pause, a hesitation that lasted a second longer than comfort allowed. From that pause, an entire stereotype was born, one that outlived her, detached from her name, and traveled forward through centuries as if it had always existed. Long before cinema, long before comedy stages, long before the joke became familiar enough to feel harmless, there was a real woman whose silence was treated as evidence, not of thought, but of emptiness. This is not the story of a queen or a revolutionary. It is not the story of a woman who changed laws or commanded armies. It is the story of how a society obsessed with sound decided that silence meant nothing, and how history accepted that decision without question. Mid-18th century France was not simply talkative, it was competitive. Parisian salons functioned like theaters of intellect. Conversation was performance. Speed mattered. Timing mattered. To speak quickly was to prove intelligence. To interrupt cleverly was to establish dominance. To hesitate was to risk humiliation. Words were not shared, they were wielded. In these rooms, men sparred with ideas about reason, faith, power, and the future of humanity. Wit was currency. A sharp phrase could elevate a reputation in minutes. A delayed response could undo it just as fast. Women were allowed inside these spaces, but under conditions. They could host salons. They could beautify conversation. They could soften the edges. But they were not expected to slow the rhythm, and Rosalie Duthé did not keep pace. Rosalie was born in Lyon, a city of commerce and craft rather than spectacle. Her family was modest, unremarkable by historical standards. No noble blood, no scandal, no inherited influence. Nothing about her birth suggested she would become a symbol. Little is recorded of her childhood, but accounts that surfaced later agree on a quiet detail. She was slow to answer questions, not mute, not incapable, simply unhurried, as though her thoughts arrived on their own schedule. In Lyon, this did not matter. Silence could exist without consequence, and Lyon gave her something else: movement, dance. Ballet in the 18th century was not entertainment alone. It was discipline, control, repetition pressed into muscle memory until the body learned obedience. Grace was earned through pain. Precision demanded intelligence of a different kind, spatial awareness, rhythm, restraint. Rosalie learned how to command attention without speaking. On stage, silence was not weakness, it was elegance, and for a time, it protected her. As she grew older, attention followed her. Her fair hair caught candlelight easily. Her stillness drew the eye. Her presence lingered in rooms. In a society where beauty could rewrite destiny, Paris became inevitable. We do not know who brought her there, a patron perhaps, an invitation, or a quiet decision she never explained. History does not bother to record how women arrive, only how they are received. And Paris received her eagerly. As a dancer, Rosalie belonged. Audiences admired her control, her posture, the calm intelligence of her movements. Applause replaced scrutiny. On stage, no one demanded quick answers. No one punished pauses. Silence was part of the performance. But performances ended, and after them came conversation. Offstage, the rules changed. Questions were asked. Eyes waited. Seconds passed. Rosalie paused, not dramatically, not defiantly. just long enough for discomfort to settle. In a city trained to fear silence, that discomfort demanded explanation. People filled it for her. She doesn't understand. She's beautiful but empty. She's slow. At first, these judgments were whispers. Then they became jokes. Then they hardened into expectation. People began to wait for her silence the way an audience waits for a punchline. When it arrived, laughter followed. No one asked why she hesitated. They did not wonder if she was thoughtful, cautious, overwhelmed, or simply uninterested in competing. They decided instead what her silence meant and repeated it until repetition became truth. In Paris, reality is not established by accuracy, it is established by frequency. Rosalie's pauses stopped being moments, they became her reputation. She was no longer introduced as a dancer, she was introduced as a curiosity. And curiosity quickly turns into mockery. Slowly, subtly, Rosalie Duthé stopped being treated as a person and began functioning as a story others told about themselves. Her silence reassured those who spoke quickly. Her hesitation comforted those afraid of being outshone. Her presence allowed others to feel clever without effort. She was spoken about more than spoken to. And history, watching from a distance, would never pause long enough to ask whether the silence had been misunderstood. By the time Rosalie Duthé became a familiar presence in Parisian salons, her reputation had already stopped belonging to her. It did not arrive all at once. It accumulated. A glance exchanged across a room, a smile that lingered a second too long, a remark repeated with a small twist. Paris did not need certainty. Paris needed circulation. And once a story began circulating, it did not matter whether it was fair. The Enlightenment salons liked to imagine themselves as civilized spaces, rooms of reason, elegance, and intellectual freedom. In truth, they were arenas. Conversation was competitive, attention was scarce, silence was dangerous. Men trained themselves to speak quickly, to sharpen thoughts into weapons. A clever interruption could win admiration. A slow reply could cost status. Words were not exchanged, they were scored. In such rooms, Rosalie's pauses felt like violations of an unspoken contract. She did not keep the tempo, and the tempo mattered more than truth. At first, her hesitation was novelty. People noticed. They commented quietly. They smiled. But novelty ages fast in Paris. Soon, guests began to anticipate her silence the way one anticipates a familiar joke. When she was asked a question, eyes shifted, time stretched. The room leaned forward, not in curiosity, but in expectation. When she paused, the room reacted, not with cruelty at first, with amusement. That is how reputations are born, gently. No one asked Rosalie why she spoke slowly. No one considered nervousness, reflection, or temperament. No one asked whether conversation itself, fast, aggressive, performative, might have been the problem. Instead, judgment filled the space her words did not. She doesn't grasp the discussion. She's charming, but there's nothing behind it. She proves beauty isn't intelligence. These statements did not describe her, they described what the speakers needed to believe. Something subtle and irreversible happened. Rosalie stopped being treated as an individual and began functioning as an illustration. She became an example used to reassure others of their own cleverness, a symbol that made complex rooms feel simpler. The Enlightenment loved symbols. They made ideas portable, and Rosalie's silence was easy to carry. Pamphleteers noticed. Satire thrived on reduction, turning people into shapes the public could recognize instantly. Rosalie, visible and undefended, was irresistible. Her image was exaggerated, her pauses were stretched into absurdity, her face was emptied of complexity. Stories circulated of her replying so late that conversations had already moved on. Whether these stories were true mattered less than the pleasure of repeating them. Repetition created reality. The most uncomfortable question is this: why did no one defend her? Because defending her offered no reward. Correcting the story would have required slowing the room, interrupting laughter, risking social friction. Empathy was expensive, mockery was efficient. Rosalie did not argue back. She did not publish explanations. She did not weaponize wit in return. And in a culture that mistook speed for intelligence, quiet dignity looked like confirmation. As ridicule grew, invitations did not stop, they increased. Wealthy men admired her beauty. Some found comfort in her calm. Others enjoyed her silence because it never challenged them. Jewelry replaced dialogue. Presence replaced agency. At dinners, she sat adorned and observed. Sometimes, cruelly, caricatures were shared in the very rooms she occupied. Laughter rippled across tables. She smiled politely. The silence returned. No one noticed the cost. Yet history hides a bitter irony here. The same silence that made Rosalie a joke also made her safe. As France edged toward revolution, words became evidence, opinions became threats, pamphlets sharpened from humor to accusation. Those who spoke loudly left records. Rosalie left none. No speeches to condemn her, no writings to incriminate her, no declarations to weaponize. Her pauses left no trail. As hunger spread and anger rose, salons lost their innocence. Laughter tightened. Beauty became suspect. Ornament turned into accusation. Rosalie's role vanished quietly. She was not arrested. She was not exiled. She was simply no longer useful. When society stopped caring about her silence, it did not mean it understood her. It meant it had moved on. The caricatures lingered, the stereotype survived, the woman faded. Rosalie Duthé was still alive, but the version of her that society had created no longer required her presence. She had become an idea, and ideas do not need permission to endure. The end of Rosalie Duthé's public life did not arrive with drama. There was no final scandal, no decisive rejection, no moment where the doors slammed shut. Instead, something quieter happened. The rooms that once noticed her began to thin. The laughter that once waited for her pauses lost its audience. The chandeliers dimmed, not all at once, but gradually, as if the world itself were growing tired. Paris did not exile Rosalie. Paris simply stopped seeing her. For years, Rosalie had existed inside spaces that required spectators: salons, theaters, dinners, rooms where identity was shaped by attention. Her silence mattered only because others waited for it. Her pauses had meaning only because they were observed. But as the political climate shifted, the salons lost their power. Conversation grew tense. Wit became dangerous. Satire sharpened into accusation. The stage collapsed. And without a stage, a symbol has nowhere to stand. The French Revolution did not consume Rosalie. It passed around her. While nobles fled, were imprisoned, or met the guillotine, Rosalie remained curiously untouched. This was not because she was protected by influence or power, but because she had left no record of thought behind. She had never spoken loudly enough to be quoted, never written boldly enough to be condemned, never mattered politically enough to be feared. In a world suddenly obsessed with declarations, she had none to give. Her silence, once mocked, became camouflage, and so she survived. But survival without meaning carries its own cost. As the old order collapsed, Rosalie's role vanished with it. The patrons who once adorned her were gone, some executed, some exiled, some ruined. The salons that had defined her identity were closed. The laughter that once followed her was replaced by chants, anger, and marching feet. No one mocked her pauses anymore. No one waited for them either. She did not fall from society. Society moved past her. There are no dramatic records of Rosalie's later years. No trial, no redemption, no transformation history found worth recording. She drifted instead into anonymity. Perhaps she lived modestly. Perhaps someone still remembered her beauty. Perhaps no one did. The historical record does not care to tell us. And that indifference is the final cruelty. For years, Rosalie had been reduced to a joke. Now she was reduced to nothing at all. There is a temptation to imagine her loneliness, but that assumes she needed the noise. Perhaps anonymity felt lighter. Perhaps silence, finally unobserved, became her own. No one turned her pauses into punchlines anymore. No one waited for her to fail a conversation. No one projected meaning onto her quiet. For the first time, her silence did not belong to others. It simply existed. History prefers clear endings. Heroes fall, villains are punished, symbols are destroyed. Rosalie received none of these. She faded instead, without resolution, without closure, without explanation. A woman once endlessly discussed became irrelevant in a world with louder crises. She did not become tragic, she became invisible. What history remembered was not Rosalie herself, it remembered the version that was easier to carry. The anecdote, the pause, the stereotype. The woman vanished, the outline remained. This is how memory often works, not by preserving truth, but by preserving convenience. Rosalie's survival through revolution might seem like fortune, but it also ensured that her ending would never be told properly. Those who die loudly are remembered, those who survive quietly are forgotten. She outlived the laughter, but not the legend. And in that strange balance between survival and erasure, Rosalie Duthé slipped fully into shadow. When words failed Rosalie Duthé, images took their place. Not loudly, not defensively, but with a patience that outlasted ridicule. Long after the salons dissolved and the pamphlets curled into dust, portraits of Rosalie remained. They did not argue with the jokes told about her. They did not correct the stories. They simply existed, quietly, persistently, waiting for a different kind of audience. And in that waiting, they told a different truth. The artists who painted Rosalie did not capture foolishness, they captured stillness. Her posture is composed, not slack. Her gaze drifts, not vacant, but distant, as though directed toward something outside the frame. Her features are calm, controlled, deliberate. There is no exaggeration, no mockery, no hint of the caricature that pamphleteers loved. Most striking of all is her mouth, often slightly parted, never speaking, always on the edge of a sentence that never arrives. The painters froze her at the exact instant that society misunderstood the pause before speech and preserved it without judgment. Where satire flattened her, paint restored dimension. Satire reduces, portraiture observes. Caricatures stripped Rosalie down to a shape that could be recognized instantly. Wide eyes, empty expression, exaggerated delay. They were meant to be consumed quickly and forgotten just as fast. Portraits demand the opposite. They require time. The longer one looks, the less certain the joke becomes. Is her gaze empty or thoughtful? Is her stillness ignorance or restraint? Is she absent or simply unwilling to perform? The portraits refuse to answer, and in that refusal they challenge the cruelty that defined her reputation. There is something haunting about the way Rosalie appears again and again in paint. She is always about to speak, never speaking, never finished, never resolved. History caught her in the pause and refused to let her move beyond it. This is preservation, but it is also imprisonment. The same moment that condemned her in life became the moment that defined her in memory. Pamphlets were meant to travel fast. They thrived on immediacy, on laughter, on sharpness that dulled quickly. Once their context faded, their cruelty lost meaning. Art was built differently. Paintings were meant to last, to be revisited by eyes that did not share the same assumptions, the same jokes, the same social incentives. As decades passed, the laughter surrounding Rosalie lost its audience. The satire aged poorly. The jokes required explanation, and jokes that need explanation rarely survive. But the portraits did. They waited. Rosalie achieved a strange form of permanence, not because she explained herself, not because she defended herself, but because she was seen. Her image moved forward in time, as in her voice vanished. People who knew nothing of her life stood before her likeness and wondered, was she bored? Was she thoughtful? Was she simply tired of performing intelligence for others? The portraits do not instruct the viewer what to think. They offer ambiguity, and ambiguity is dangerous to stereotypes. A portrait is never neutral. It reflects the subject, but it also reveals the viewer. Those who believed Rosalie was foolish looked at her face and found confirmation. They saw vacancy where others saw calm. They projected their assumptions into her stillness and left satisfied. Others saw something else. They saw a woman removed from noise, a presence uninterested in competition, a figure who did not rush herself to satisfy expectations. The same image supported opposing conclusions. That alone exposes how fragile the original judgment always was. There is a temptation to read Rosalie's painted calm as passivity, but stillness can be refusal. Refusal to perform, refusal to rush, refusal to compress thought into entertainment. In a culture obsessed with speed, stillness becomes disruptive. The portraits preserve that disruption long after the culture that mocked it disappeared. Words had been weaponized against Rosalie. Every sentence spoken about her became another layer of interpretation she could not control. Her silence invited explanation, and explanation turned hostile. Images asked for less. They did not demand speed. They did not punish pauses. They did not require participation. They allowed her to exist without justification. In that sense, art did what society refused to do. It let her be. Rosalie never defended herself publicly, but her portraits do something quieter and more effective. They complicate the story. They introduce doubt, and doubt is fatal to cruelty. For every viewer who pauses before her image and wonders rather than laughs, the stereotype weakens. The caricatures faded, the pamphlets crumbled, the salons vanished, but her face remained. Not triumphant, not tragic, just present. In paint, Rosalie finally escaped the punchline. Rosalie Duthé disappeared quietly, but what had been built around her did not. The version of her that society preferred, the simplified, flattened, laughable version, outlived the woman herself. It loosened its grip on her name, detached from her body, and began moving on its own, lighter and easier to carry. That is how stereotypes survive. They shed their origins. At first, Rosalie's reputation was personal. It depended on her presence in a room, on the expectation of her pause, on the momentary discomfort her silence produced. But once the idea solidified, she was no longer required. The story had become portable. It could be retold without her. It could be reused without context. It could be... Rosalie Duthé disappeared quietly. But what had been built around her did not. The version of her that society preferred, the simplified, flattened, laughable version, outlived the woman herself. It loosened its grip on her name, detached from her body, and began moving on its own, lighter and easier to carry. That is how stereotypes survive. They shed their origins. At first, Rosalie's reputation was personal. It depended on her presence in a room, on the expectation of her pause, on the momentary discomfort her silence produced. But once the idea solidified, she was no longer required. The story had become portable. It could be retold without her. It could be reused without context. It could be understood without explanation. A single pause had been transformed into a shortcut, an instant signal that required no thinking. Beautiful, blonde, slow. The human being vanished behind the outline. The stereotype persisted because it served a purpose. It reassured men who feared being challenged. It comforted audiences who equated speed with intelligence. It punished women who refused to perform wit on command. Calling a beautiful woman foolish required no proof, only repetition. And Rosalie's story, stripped of nuance, provided permission. The joke asked nothing of its audience. It rewarded them immediately. No one needed to verify the stories about Rosalie. They had been told too many times. Repetition does something dangerous. It replaces evidence. The more acclaim circulates, the less it feels like an opinion, and the more it feels like a fact. Over time, even Rosalie's name became unnecessary. The shape of the joke was enough. The stereotype no longer belonged to her, it belonged to culture. As years passed, the salons that once buzzed with laughter disappeared. The Enlightenment gave way to revolution, empire, and modernity. The people who mocked Rosalie faded into obscurity. But the idea survived. It traveled through theater and literature. It slipped into humor and storytelling. It reappeared wherever beauty was treated as a contradiction. Each retelling made it less human and more automatic. The stereotype hardened. For the stereotype to survive, certain truths had to be erased. Her discipline as a dancer, her endurance through political collapse, her ability to navigate dangerous spaces without speaking herself into ruin. These details complicated the joke, so they were discarded. The stereotype required simplicity, and complexity threatened it. Reducing Rosalie to a joke required pretending that intelligence only lives in words, that speed equals depth, that silence means absence. These assumptions were never neutral. They reflected fear, fear of ambiguity, fear of quiet, fear of women who could not be easily categorized. Rosalie did not create those fears, she revealed them. The stereotype that grew from Rosalie's silence did not stay in the 18th century. It evolved, it adapted, it survived by pretending it had always been natural. Modern audiences inherited it without knowing where it came from, without knowing that it began with a real woman whose pauses were misread and then weaponized. That ignorance is part of its power. Rosalie Duthé unsettles us because she exposes a pattern that has not disappeared. We still distrust quiet women. We still reward performance over depth. We still confuse speed with intelligence. Her story lingers because we recognize it, not as history, but as habit. In the end, the stereotype was never built from truth. It was built from convenience. Convenience for those who wanted to feel clever without listening. Convenience for those who preferred certainty over understanding. Convenience for a culture uncomfortable with silence. Rosalie did not invent the joke. She absorbed it. Stereotypes survive not because they are accurate, but because they are easy. They do the thinking for us. And that is why Rosalie's story still matters, because every time a quiet person is reduced to a joke, her pause echoes again. At the end of Rosalie Duthé's story, there is no revelation waiting to be uncovered. No hidden diary surfaces from an archive. No final letter explains her silences. No confession arrives to correct the record. History offers no last-minute apology. Instead, it leaves us with a question, and then refuses to answer it. And perhaps that is the most honest ending Rosalie could have been given. For generations, people asked the same thing about Rosalie. Was she intelligent enough? Was she quick enough? Was she worthy of the attention she received? These questions miss the point entirely. They assume intelligence must be loud to be real. They assume speed is proof of depth. They assume silence is a failure rather than a choice, a temperament, or a boundary. History judged Rosalie not by what she was, but by what she refused or failed to perform. And performance was the only language her world respected. When the stereotype is stripped away, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is a woman trained in discipline, a performer whose body learned control long before her voice was judged, a survivor who moved through salons, ridicule, and revolution without leaving evidence that could destroy her. She endured environments that devoured women more outspoken than she was. She lived through a political collapse that punished words mercilessly. She survived not because she was powerful, but because she was unreadable. That is not stupidity. That is endurance. There are forms of intelligence that do not announce themselves. The intelligence of restraint, the intelligence of timing, the intelligence of knowing when speech creates danger instead of clarity. Rosalie lived in a culture where words could elevate or erase you, where a careless sentence could harden into rumor, then accusation, then punishment. She learned, perhaps instinctively, that silence carried fewer consequences than honesty. History punished her socially for that restraint, but history also failed to recognize it. It is tempting to imagine Rosalie as powerless, pushed along by a story she never chose. But power does not always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like refusal. Refusal to perform wit on command. Refusal to compress thought into entertainment. Refusal to compete in rooms that reward cruelty disguised as cleverness. Her pauses may not have been weakness. They may have been boundaries. Rosalie never reclaimed her narrative. She did not stand up in a salon and demand to be reinterpreted. She did not write a defense. She did not correct the record. That absence frustrates us because we are trained to expect resolution. We want a moment where the misunderstood woman finally speaks and proves everyone wrong. But Rosalie offers no such moment. Her life does not end in triumph. It ends in clarity. When we return to her portraits now, knowing what history did with her silence, the pause looks different. It no longer feels empty. It no longer feels delayed. It feels deliberate. A space where meaning was never handed over willingly, even when others tried to fill it. The pause becomes the only thing history could not fully colonize. Rosalie Duthé was remembered for silence, and silence is the one thing history struggled to distort completely. Words can be twisted, stories can be weaponized, jokes can outlive their cruelty. Silence resists all of it. It waits. Rosalie matters because her story exposes a habit that never disappeared. We still mistrust quiet people. We still reward speed over depth. We still confuse performance with intelligence. She matters because stereotypes do not survive on truth, they survive on convenience, and convenience has always been more powerful than understanding. Her life reminds us that history is often written by the loud and preserved by those who never pause long enough to listen. Rosalie Duthé never explained herself, and perhaps that is the only ending that truly belongs to her. Her life was taken apart by voices louder than hers. Her silence was filled with meanings she never chose. But in the end, the pause remains, untranslated, unresolved, untouched. For once, history cannot interrupt it.
If you're ready for more real talk about getting video, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell.